In the fiercest of storms, it's not the unyielding strength of the sailor, but their ability to adapt that leads them safely home. One warm afternoon, as the sun cast its golden light upon the Sea of Galilee, Jesus sat with his disciples on the shore, resting after a long day of teaching. The quiet lapping of the waves on the sand was soothing, but a deeper turbulence stirred within his beloved followers. Jesus, always perceptive to the hearts around him, could sense their inner struggles. Though the sea was calm, there was a storm brewing in the hearts of his disciples. Peter, usually bold and brimming with energy, seemed unusually silent. John, known for his deep reflection, sat with a troubled expression. Thomas, whose heart often wrestled with doubt, looked uneasy as he stared out at the endless horizon. Even the normally joyful Matthew appeared weighed down, his brows furrowed in thought. Finally, John, ever the one to voice the deeper emotions, broke the silence. His voice was soft but carried the weight of his turmoil. "Master," he began, "we have followed you, learned from you, and yet, it feels as though no matter how hard I try, I fall short. I want to serve you perfectly, but every time I try, I stumble. It's as if perfection is just beyond my reach, and I fear I'm not good enough." Peter, usually quick to rebuke or encourage, remained quiet but nodded in agreement. He too had felt the sting of failure, especially in moments when his passion had overtaken his wisdom. He clenched his fists as if trying to hold on to something that was slipping through his fingers. Thomas, who often expressed the doubts and questions the others were too afraid to voice, finally spoke up. "We strive to be like you, Lord, but how can we? You are perfect and we are not. No matter how hard I try, doubt creeps in and I can't shake it. I feel like I'm constantly failing." Their words hung in the air, heavy with the burden of self-doubt and the impossible weight of perfectionism. Jesus listened patiently, allowing the full depth of their emotions to be expressed. He could feel their frustration, their pain, and their desire to be worthy of the calling they had been given. After a long pause, Jesus finally spoke, his voice calm and filled with understanding. "Let me tell you a story," he said, his words immediately drawing their full attention. His stories were always full of meaning, and the disciples leaned in, eager to listen. Once there was a sailor who had sailed the seas for many years. He was known throughout his village as one of the finest sailors, skillful, brave, and precise. His ship was always in perfect condition, and he prided himself on keeping everything flawless. His sails were always mended perfectly, his ropes always tightly secured, and his navigation skills were unmatched. The sailor believed that his success came from his ability to control everything around him, to master every detail, and to keep everything in perfect order. For years, the sailor's meticulous attention to detail had served him well. He sailed through many storms, always confident that his perfection would carry him through. He believed that if he just tried hard enough, there would be no room for error. And for years, it seemed that this pursuit of perfection had kept him safe. One day, however, as the sailor set out on what seemed like an ordinary voyage, a storm unlike any he had ever faced descended upon him. The sky darkened suddenly, the winds howled with a fury he had never known, and the waves towered high above his boat. The sea, which had always been his ally, now seemed like a raging beast intent on destroying him. The sailor, determined as ever, tightened the sails and tied down the ropes with more force than usual. He fought the storm with everything he had, confident that his perfect skills and flawless preparations would see him through. But as the storm raged on, the wind grew stronger, and despite his best efforts, his carefully crafted sails began to tear. The ropes, which he had tied with such precision, began to fray and snap under the immense strain. Water flooded into the boat, and no matter how hard he tried to keep control, it seemed as if the storm was winning. Panic began to set in. The sailor couldn't understand why his perfect techniques were failing him now. He had always believed that if he just tried hard enough, if everything was just right, he could overcome any challenge. But now, his perfection was crumbling before his eyes, and with it, his confidence. In his desperation, the sailor did something he had never done before. he stopped trying to fight the storm. Exhausted and broken, he let go of the need to control every detail. He let the sails fall, allowed the ropes to loosen, and stopped resisting the waves. Instead of battling the storm, he let the boat ride the waves, flowing with the rhythm of the sea instead of fighting against it. And something remarkable happened. As the sailor surrendered to the storm, the boat, once on the verge of sinking, found its balance. The waves, though still powerful, no longer seemed like enemies. The wind, though fierce, no longer tore at the boat but seemed to guide it. The storm had not weakened, but the sailor's perspective had changed. He no longer fought against the storm but allowed himself to move with it. Eventually the storm passed. The sailor, though shaken, had survived. His boat, however, was no longer the pristine vessel it had once been. The sails were torn, the ropes frayed, and the hull was weathered. The sailor returned to the village, expecting ridicule for the state of his ship. He feared that the villagers would mock him for allowing his perfect vessel to fall into disrepair. But when the villagers saw him, they didn't see the damage. They saw the sailor who had come through the storm. They saw a man who had weathered the fiercest trial, not by holding on to his perfection, but by adapting, by trusting the journey, and by letting go when he needed to. His experience had given him wisdom beyond what perfection ever could. The villagers marveled at his story, not because of his unyielding strength, but because of his resilience and his willingness to surrender to the forces beyond his control. And in the end, it was not the perfect state of his boat that mattered. It was the fact that he had made it through the storm, stronger and wiser for it. Jesus paused, letting the story settle in the hearts of his disciples. He could see the recognition in their eyes as they reflected on the meaning of the story. Each of them could relate to the sailor, fighting their own storms with the belief that perfection was the only way through. But the sailor's journey had shown them something different. Peter, who had always strived to be the perfect leader among the disciples, was the first to speak. His voice was quiet, filled with the weight of his own realizations. "Master, I've spent so much time trying to be the perfect disciple. I've tried to prove that I'm strong, that I'm worthy, that I won't fail you. But I've failed many times. I've made mistakes. And each time I do, I feel like I'm not good enough to lead." Jesus turned to Peter, his eyes filled with love and compassion. "Peter, it is not your perfection that I have called you for. It is your heart, your willingness to keep going even when you fall. Leadership is not about never making mistakes. It's about learning from them and continuing to grow. Like the sailor, you don't need to be flawless to weather the storm. You need to trust the journey and adapt when the storm comes." Peter's eyes welled up with tears. He had carried the weight of perfectionism for so long, believing that his failures made him less worthy. But now he began to understand that it was not his perfection that mattered to Jesus. It was his faithfulness, his willingness to keep trying even when he fell short. Thomas, who had always been open about his doubts, spoke next. "Lord, I've always questioned everything, myself, others, even you at times. I thought that if I could just be certain, if I could find the perfect answer, I would be stronger. But no matter how hard I try, the doubt doesn't go away." Jesus smiled gently at Thomas. "Thomas, doubt is not your enemy. It is part of your journey." The sailor in the storm did not know how he would survive, but he trusted the process. He let go of the need for certainty and allowed the waves to carry him. In the same way, you must learn to trust even when you don't have all the answers. It is not the absence of doubt that makes you strong. It is your willingness to keep moving forward despite it. Thomas nodded, his heart softening as he realized that his doubts did not make him weak. They were part of his journey, part of what made his faith unique. He didn't need to have all the answers to follow Jesus, he just needed to trust. John, who had always been deeply introspective, spoke last. "Master, I've tried to be perfect in following you. I've sought to love as you love, to serve as you serve, but I always feel like I fall short. I see my flaws, my failures, and I wonder how you can love me despite them." Jesus looked at John with deep affection. "John, you have misunderstood my love. It is not conditional upon your perfection. I do not love you for your flawless actions. I love you because you are mine. Like the sailor in the storm, your worth is not in your ability to keep everything perfect, but in your willingness to surrender and trust. My love for you is not based on your performance. It is based on who you are. John's heart swelled with emotion as the truth of Jesus' words sank in. For so long he had carried the belief that he needed to earn love, that he needed to be perfect to be worthy of it. But now he saw that Jesus' love was a gift, freely given without condition. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow across the sea, the disciples sat in silence, reflecting on the profound wisdom they had just received. The burden of perfection that had weighed them down began to lift, replaced by a deep sense of peace. They understood now that their worth wasn't tied to their ability to be flawless. Their mistakes, their doubts, their imperfections, they were not obstacles to their calling. They were part of the journey, part of the process of becoming. Jesus spoke again, his voice soft but filled with authority. Perfectionism will bind you, just as the sailor's rigid sails nearly caused his ship to sink. But if you allow yourselves to be flexible, to trust in the midst of failure, you will find that what you once saw as weakness will become your greatest strength. It's not the absence of mistakes that makes you worthy, but the courage to keep moving through them. A new understanding blossomed in the hearts of the disciples. They no longer felt the crushing weight of trying to be perfect. They realized that their journey with Jesus was not about never falling, it was about getting back up when they did. It was about trusting him to guide them through the storms, even when they didn't have all the answers. Peter, always the one to speak his heart, finally smiled, a tear slipping down his cheek. So, it's okay if we fail as long as we keep trusting you? Jesus smiled back at him, his love for them shining brighter than the setting sun. Yes, Peter. The strength is not in being perfect, it's in trusting that I will carry you through the storm. And as the disciples sat by the sea, the night falling around them, they felt a deep, joyful peace. The storm within their hearts had passed, and they knew now that their imperfections didn't disqualify them from following Jesus. In fact, it was through their imperfections that they could experience his grace more fully. Final thought: perfection isn't the goal. Life's true beauty is found in our willingness to trust, adapt, and keep moving forward in the face of imperfection. In the cracks and flaws of our lives, we discover the grace that makes us whole. Jesus sat back, observing the deep peace that now washed over his disciples. Though the sea before them was still and calm, the storm that had once brewed within them had passed. Each disciple had found a sense of release, realizing that their worth wasn't measured by perfection. This is end of the story. Please like this video and subscribe this channel for more Jesus story like this. May the God watch over you.